The next two symbols are so closely connected as to be virtually interwoven, depicted as both a city, Babylon the Great, and a harlot woman. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. In Bible prophecy, women are associated with the people of God. A pure woman is the faithful and true people of God. In New Testament times, that is the true church. Harlots in prophecy claim to follow God, but they are unfaithful. This woman is a fallen church, morally decadent and corrupt. She fornicates with kings for wealth and worldly power. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. Not clear enough? And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. The golden cup holds her false teachings and doctrines, as well as the blood of the saints she has murdered. The world is drunk on her false doctrines, and she is drunk on the blood of the saints. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Of Babylon we are told, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And of the harlot, the great whore, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. History has informed us for centuries that when church and state share a bed, people get prematurely dead. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sitteth. It is within the city of Rome, called the City of 7 Hills, that the entire area of Vatican State proper is now confined. There is only one city on earth that has been known as the city built on 7 hills for the last 2,000 years. That city is Rome. 2 more symbols added to the collage of prophetic interpretation regarding the history of this world, past, present, and future. The last reference comes from Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians. It is a reference to a, quote, man of sin. It is regarding the second coming of Christ. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This seems to be a no-brainer for those who advocate the future individual Antichrist. After all, he is called a man. But let's look more closely. The man of sin is seen to be seated in the temple of God. It is interesting that the largest temple of the Roman Catholic Church is St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, more than 2 football fields long. It is built in the shape of a cross, and it is the capital of the Roman Catholic system. Inside, at the top of the cross, is the chair of St. Peter. It is elevated, and from it one could look down the length of the church through the main altar. There is no statue of Peter in the chair. It is empty. The man who sits in the temple of God proclaiming himself to be God is no specific individual. It is the office of the papacy, filled by the Bishop of Rome for nearly 2,000 years, an office that claims both spiritual and political sovereignty over the entire planet Earth. He, as God, sits in the temple of God. Notice what the Catholic Church says. The Church has but one ruler, the visible one, the Pope, who, as the legitimate successor of Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, fills the apostolic chair. But he does not just symbolically sit in the great chair in the temple. He does so proclaiming himself to be God. That's what the Bible says. And that's why it calls him the man of sin. What does the Catholic Church say? Again, from the Roman Catholic source Prompta Bibliotheca, the Pope is as it were God on earth, sovereign of the faithful of Christ, chief of kings, having plenitude of power, to whom has been entrusted by the omnipotent God direction not only of the earthly, but also of the heavenly kingdom. So he is king of both heaven and earth. And again, the testimony of the Bible regarding the man of sin, he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Centuries in advance, the Apostle Paul was able to see the nature of the coming apostasy of the Christian church and the arrogance with which it would flaunt its ill-gained power. We've looked at 6 symbols. A cross-reference of the identifying marks of these symbols clearly illustrates that there is no prophetic magic here. All 6 of these symbols refer irrefutably to the Roman Catholic papal system. It is important to note here that scholars for over 1,000 years have been locating the papacy in these symbols. But again, why so much time and so many different symbols focused on the papacy? Recall the succession of empires. These were to cover at least 2,600 years. Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece cover a little more than 450 of those years. The pagan Roman Empire lasted longer than all 3 of them, and papal Rome lasted more than twice as long as that. No wonder Daniel's interest turned immediately to the 4th beast and the little horn of Daniel 7. Pagan and papal Rome have dominated a large majority of that 2,600-year time period. Papal Rome alone, more than half of it. It has become popular to point out that the papacy of the last 200 years has differed widely from the papacy of medieval times. Some important things happened right about there that changed the course of world history and affected the power of the papacy. We need to look closely at those events. But first it would be well to briefly survey how the Roman Catholic Church managed to accrue such power to itself in the first place. The greatest cover-up ever involves the most successful public relations whitewash in the history of the world. And it's happening before our very eyes right here in the 21st century. It is so successful that few people are even aware of it. Its roots go back nearly 2,000 years to the remarkable story of how the early Roman bishops transformed a portion of the once obscure and persecuted sect called Christians into a dominant political force ruling over the kings of Europe during the Middle Ages. Not riding on a donkey, but on a golden throne on the shoulders of men. It didn't happen overnight. It took centuries for the transformation to occur. The early Christians had no political influence whatsoever. At times they were tolerated. At other times they were hunted like dogs, crucified and torn apart by wild beasts, or forced to fight gladiators in the Roman circus. They were even bound to poles, rolled in tar, and set on fire to light the imperial garden. Over a period of 300 years they faced persecution and ostracism under emperors like Nero, Severus, and Diocletian. Then a new challenger fought for control of the Roman Empire. Whatever his reason, he chose to fight under the sign of Christianity. His victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge won him not only control of Rome, but the entire Roman Empire. This was Constantine, and his Edict of Milan in 313 AD officially legalized Christianity within the Roman Empire and put an end to persecution. The Church responded by adopting a governmental structure similar to that of the empire. Ritualism and pageantry began to push aside the simple moral structure of the early Church. Christian historical waymarks became merged with pagan feasts and rituals to appeal to Roman and barbarian pagans alike. Some 60 years later, Theodosius I issued his Edict of Thessalonica. The Christian Church was elevated to the status of the official state religion of the Roman Empire, and the greatest rags to riches story in all of history was on its way to realization. With the cultural accommodations being made by Christianity, converts flooded in from the ranks of paganism, seeking social favor and status from the newly recognized state religion. The church in Rome acquired great influence over the other churches in the empire. Roman bishops arose who displayed an affinity for wealth and power. Their position of favor with the government and their location in the capital city offered many such opportunities. Soon they discovered ways to extend their influence and authority not only over other Christian churches, but over other political structures within the empire as well. Whatever anyone may think about religion, history has shown that it can often be a viable portal to political power. Opportunity for power never fails to attract those who seek it. By the middle of the 5th century, the Bishop of Rome was claiming supremacy over all other Christian bishops in the empire. As the invasions of the barbarian tribes were toppling the imperial political structure, more power began to accrue to these religious leaders. Embattled emperors offered to back the Roman bishop as rector of the whole church. In the 6th century, the prestige of the Roman bishop continued to increase dramatically, even as the Western Empire dissolved politically. The edict issued by Justinian from Constantinople invested the Bishop of Rome with authority over the remains of the Western Roman Empire. The title Pontifex Maximus had originated as the title of the head of the ancient Roman religion in the early years of the Roman Republic. It was adopted by the emperors and eventually also by the bishops of Rome. The office of the papacy emerged in the 6th century under this title. More claims to more titles and political power continued to emanate from the supposed successor of St. Peter. A forged document was trotted out, allegedly issued by Constantine himself. We attribute to the See of Peter all the dignity, all the glory, all the authority of the imperial power. Furthermore, we give to Sylvester and to his successors our Palace of the Lateran, which is incontestably the finest palace on the earth. We give him our crown, our mitre, our diadem, and all our imperial vestments. We transfer to him the imperial dignity. We bestow on the Holy Pontiff in free gift the city of Rome and all the western cities of Italy. In the 9th century, more forged documents appeared with even more outlandish claims to supremacy. Pope Nicholas used them to demand further submission from bishops and princes. The arrogance of the popes grew from this time onward. Popes became intoxicated with their own pride. Some in their teens and 20s lost their senses in drunken immorality. The infamous women of history, Theodora and Marozia, for many years governed the papal throne. That unholy see, pretending to rise above the majesty of kings and bishops, was sunk in the dregs of sin. Theodora and Marozia installed and deposed at their pleasure those who sat in the pretended chair of St. Peter. For 2 centuries, the papacy was one wild arena of disorders as the most powerful families of Italy disputed and fought over it like a possession. Near the end of the 11th century, Gregory VII restored moral order to a degree and returned to the task of elevating the status of the papal office. He declared that the reign of the Pope is equal to the reign of God himself. By the 13th century, the papacy was in full bloom. At his inauguration, Innocent III quoted Jeremiah in reference to himself, "See, today I appoint you over nations." He later claimed supremacy over all the now well-formed monarchies of Europe. He also codified the claim that the Pope stands between God and man as a mediator and vicar of Christ. Pope Boniface VIII took it one step further. The decision of the Pope and the decision of God constitute one decision. No one can appeal from the Pope to God because there is one decision and one court of God and the Pope. We, moreover, proclaim, declare, and pronounce that it is altogether necessary to salvation for every human being to be subject to the Roman pontiff. The doctrine of papal supremacy had reached the peak of its arrogance. Boniface VIII now claimed for the papacy full religious and secular authority over every human being on the face of the earth. And so it was that Peter, the simple fisherman of the Bible, became Peter, the gold and jewel-encrusted Pope of Rome, precursor to all those who would claim the right to legislate the conscience of every man and woman on earth. And how did all of this papal authority benefit the common man? It kept him safe from heresy, of course, from following his innately sinful tendency of not going along with every doctrinal whim of the papacy. In 1184, Pope Lucius III commanded that all kings and princes take an oath before their bishop to persecute heresy. Refusal or neglect was to be punished with excommunication, and the laws against heresy were to be pitilessly enforced. Possession of even a fragment of the Bible would qualify as heresy. The penalty was the confiscation of one's property, then torture, then death. I understand the confiscation part. If you turned in your neighbor as a possible heretic, you would receive 1/3 of his earthly goods. But why the brutal torture? The torture was to secure a confession in order to justify condemning the heretic to death. And the most barbaric and inhumane forms of torture imaginable were applied to this end. Unthinkable brutality in the name of God, numbering into the tens of millions the victims of the papal inquisitions. The engineering, ingenuity, and craftsmanship of the instruments of torture, each designed to extract the utmost suffering possible, are testimony to the degraded depths to which the human mind can sink. Okay, then, I understand the torture and confession part, but why kill them even after they confess? That's simple enough, really. Do you want to give them back their confiscated properties? 75 popes, one after another from Pope Innocent III to Pope Pius VII, approved of torture, murder, burning at the stake, and the confiscation of property in the horrific centuries of the Inquisition.